Welcome, dear listener. Find a comfortable place to rest, not just your body, but your thoughts. Let the frantic pulse of the day recede. Let the noise of the world soften to a distant hum. Feel the stillness gather around you, thick and gentle, like twilight at the edge of a quiet wood, where the trees hold their breath and the last light clings to the leaves. We are about to journey together, you and I, not merely through myth, but through memory itself, through the deep, resonant echoes of thunder and the faintest whispers of forgotten gods. The wind murmurs through the desolate peaks of Olympus, but it does not sing as it once did. Once, this wind was a living tapestry of sound. It carried the crackling fire of prophecy from Delphi's sacred heart, the solemn, rising hymn of 100 sacrifices, the riotous, earth-shaking laughter of gods at their feasting. It carried the scent of nectar and the sharp, metallic temps of Ares' impatience. Now it is a quiet, grieving breather, lonely whisper that brushes the cold. Grey stones where magnificent altars once burned with offerings. It traces the outlines of foundations where palaces of gold and ivory glittered against the sun. It is in that profound silence, in the space between what was and what is, that we begin our story. We approach this past not with the blind reverence of a worshipper, but with the gentle caution of an archaeologist of the soul. We are not here to praise, but to remember. Let us journey together, back to a time before time itself had a shape and age, when the universe was a raw, trembling, and boundless potential. Imagine not nothingness, but everythingness, all at once. There was no earth, no sky, no sea, no sun to mark the day or moon to silver the night. There was only a great yawning void, a swirling, formless maelstrom of possibility called chaos, from which all things were destined to be born. Out of this primal tempest, two immense forces separated themselves, like oil from water. First came Gaia, the broad-bosomed earth, emerging not in a cataclysm, but with a deep, sonorous hum. She was the principle of solidity, the promise of roots and stone, the scent of wet soil and the cool, dark comfort of the deep. She was a foundation in the heart of the void. And then, arching over her, came Uranus, the sky. He was a vast and starlit tapestry, a dome of infinite height and velvet darkness, pricked with the cold fire of distant stars. He was the first great pair with Gaia, a sacred elemental union, of heaviness and breath, of tangible form and limitless space. Gaia, with her ever-fertile womb, did not need a consort to begin her work. From her own being, she birthed the jagged spines of the mountains, their peaks tearing at the fabric of the heavens. She sighed forth the deep, mysterious hollows that would cradle the seas. She shaped the very star-pierced dome above her, a perfect mirror to the Uranus, who was both her son and her lover. And Uranus, mesmerized, lay over her, casting his starlight and his profound silence upon her body. From their joining, their constant embrace, came the first true line of deities, the Titans. They were beings vast in strength and monumental. In will, their limbs like granite and their eyes like distant nebulae. They were the architects of the world to come, figures of immense power and gravity. Among these towering figures was Cronus, the youngest, and by far the cleverest, while his siblings were forces of nature. Sinus, the endless river. Hyperion, the first like Cronus, was a being of thought and purpose. He was a blade of ambition hidden in a sheath of quiet contemplation. He watched, he listened, and he understood the mechanics of power in a way his brethren did not. Yet even his birth, the last and most cunning of the Titans, bore with it the dark shadow of unease. Uranus, you see, looked upon the children he had made and felt not pride, but a chilling premonition of his own undoing. In their immense strength he saw a challenge. In their potent eyes he saw storms not yet broken, thunder yet unshaped, and the grim reflection of his own eventual decay. He feared what he had made, for he knew that power, once given, will always seek to grow. So, in an act of terrible, suffocating love, he pushed his magnificent children back into the depths of Gaia's womb, locking them in the crushing darkness beneath the earth. He would not allow them the sky, the light, or the freedom to become what he dreaded. And Gaia, she who had brought forth life with such joy, groaned with the unbearable weight of it. The children she had birthed now churned within her, a constant, living prison. Her mountains shuddered, her plains trembled. Her sorrow was a physical ache, a pressure that built and built until it curdled into a cold, focused rage from the deepest part of herself, from the very heart of the earth where metal sleeps. She drew forth her pain and forged it into a weapon. It was a sickle, long and curved like a crescent moon, made of unbreakable adamant, a substance dark as a starless night and harder than any stone. She presented this terrible instrument to her imprisoned children, her voice a low rumble from the depths. It was Cronus, the quiet and ambitious one, who took it. His hand did not tremble. On a night when the stars were especially bright, Uranus descended once more, drawn by love and longing to cover his beloved earth. As he lay upon her, lost in his embrace, Cronus rose up from the secret places of the world. With a single, swift, and silent stroke, he brought the adamant sickle down and severed his father's power, castrating him. A terrible, soundless scream echoed through the cosmos. Uranus recoiled, his power broken, his reign finished. From the drops of his blood that fell upon the fertile body of Gaia, monstrous and strange life bloomed into being. The Erinyes, the Furies, with eyes of flame and hair of writhing serpents, rose to pursue all who spill kindred blood. The giants, massive and brutish, groaned like falling trees as they heaved themselves from the soil, their hearts filled with violence. Thus fell Uranus, the first king of the sky, and Cronus, the liberator, took the heavens as his own. He ruled with a steadier, more orderly hand than his father. This was the Golden Age, a time of peace and plenty under the Titan king. But his mind was not free. His act of liberation had been an act of violence, and the ghost of that violence haunted him. As his father had feared him, he too began to fear. A prophecy, whispered by the dying lips of Uranus, or perhaps by Gaia herself, curled around him like insidious smoke. It whispered in the halls of his palace, in the rustle of his robes, in the clink of his goblet. One day, a child of his own blood would rise up and cast him down, just as he had done. He would not be taken unaware. He would master fate itself. When Rhea, his sister and queen, a goddess of gentle streams and quiet strength, bore him their first children, Hestia, goddess of the hearth, Demeter of the grain, Hera of marriage, Hades of the unseen depths, and Poseidon of the sea. Cronus's fear became action. One by one, as they were born, perfect and divine, he took them from Rhea's arms, opened his cavernous mouth, and swallowed each one whole. He did not kill them, they were immortal, but he imprisoned them. In his grand palace on Mount Othrys, they sat, not in golden cradles, but in the living dark prison of his belly, alive and dreaming of a world they could not see. Rhea's heart shattered with each loss. She wept, her tears feeding the secret springs of the earth. But she dared not disobey her fearsome husband till she bore her sixth child. This time, her grief was stronger than her fear. That night, guided by her mother Gaia's counsel, she fled to a cave on the island of Crete, a place veiled with thick ivy and hidden by the ceaseless rush of the wind. There, in secret, she gave birth. Then, with trembling hands, she took a large, smooth stone from a nearby riverbed, wrapped it tightly in swaddling clothes, and returned to Cronus. Consumed by his paranoia, the Titan king devoured the heavy bundle without a moment's pause, believing his dread work was finally complete. But Rhea had already fled back to the shores of Crete, where she gave her true child, her last hope, to the tender care of the nymphs of the woods. This child was Zeus. He grew not in the oppressive shadow of a throne, but beneath the wide and watchful stars. He was nurtured by the divine goat Amalthea, whose horn flowed with ambrosia and whose milk ran sweet as honey. He was guarded by the Curetes, armored priests of the earth, who danced and clashed their bronze shields and spears to drown out the sound of his infant cries, masking them with a rhythmic, protective thunder. Zeus thrived in this wild, secret cradle. He learned strength, not from dominion, but from the land itself. He chased the fleeting shadows of eagles, felt the warm, sun-baked rock under his bare feet, and listened to the deep, resonant voice of the world, its tremors, its cycles, its patient and enduring needs. In that cave, beneath the gnarled roots of ancient trees and the unyielding weight of rock, a god of thunder began to dream. Not of vengeance, not yet. His heart was too full of the world's beauty for that. He dreamed of justice, perhaps, of a cosmic balance his father had feared and broken, and so the sky, so long held in a state of tense, orderly quiet, began to stir. A new energy gathered faintly at first, as if the air itself were testing the weight of a coming storm. Over the silent peaks of Olympus, the mist coiled a little tighter, and the old, grieving wind began to lift its voice once more, finding in it a note of anticipation. As the first spark of rebellion leaps from hidden flint, let us steady ourselves and step now into the gathering storm. The boy in the cave has grown to manhood. The prison within the Titan King has become unbearable. The hour of reckoning draws near. In the next breath of this tale, we shall witness a rebellion not of mortals against their masters, but of gods against their creator. Thunder waits to be wielded. An army waits to be freed. The old world shivers on the brink of a war that will tear the cosmos apart. Let us begin. Imagine, if you will, a mountain under moonlight. The sky a canvas of bruised violet and swirling grey, pregnant with a storm that is not yet broken. Upon this precipice, at the very cusp of fate, stands a young god. His name is Zeus, but in this moment, he is not yet the thunder, not yet the king of all he surveys. He is something purer, something more potent. He is resolve, wrapped in the flesh of youth, a righteous vengeance softened by a deep and unwavering sense of justice. He was a secret, a life lived in the quiet shadows of a world that did not know he existed. Raised in whispers by the nymphs of Crete, taught the law of the cosmos in the solemn secrecy of a hidden cave, Zeus has spent his years listening. He has listened to the sigh of the wind carrying tales from the mainland, tales of a tyrant king. He has listened to the stories of his own devoured siblings, names that should have been his companions, his family. In the long, lonely nights, he has felt the profound absence of what might have been the echo of shared laughter in a hall he'd never seen, the steady warmth of guiding hands he'd never held, the simple comfort of kinship beside a hearth. These phantom memories, these ghosts of a stolen family, have forged his purpose. He knows what must be done. The debt of his father, Cronus, is long overdue. The island of Crete, with its rugged mountains and shores kissed by the wind-dark sea, had kept his secret well. The Dictaean cave was both his cradle and his classroom, where the honey-tongued nymphs Adrastea and Ida nursed him on the milk of the goat Amalthea, whose hide would one day become his impenetrable shield, the Aegis. But the world beyond the island's shores was shifting, groaning under the weight of an ancient and curdling power. The old gods, the primordials, grumbled in their tombs of stone and sky, their dreams stirring the very foundations of the earth. The Titans ruled, but their reign had grown brittle, like old parchment left too long in the sun. Cronus, the once victor who had wielded the sickle against his own father, Uranus, now ruled not with strength, but with a paranoia that soured even the winds and turned the rain to acid. He walked the gilded, cavernous halls of his fortress on Mount Othrys, with eyes like shards of obsidian, suspicious of every shadow, every whisper, every loyal bow. His fear of prophecy that his own child would usurp him as he had his father had become a prison of his own making. A self-fulfilling dread that poisoned the very air the world breathed. Zeus, now grown into the full, breathtaking power of his divinity, his form radiating a light that seemed to drink the moonlight, left his cave behind. He bid farewell to the nymphs who had been his only family, his gaze sweeping over the island that had been his sanctuary. He carried its wildness in his heart, its rugged strength in his bones. But his path did not lead directly to the battlefield. War without wisdom is but savagery. So first he sought counsel. His journey took him to the wisest of the Titanesses, Metis, whose name meant thought and cunning. She dwelt in a place that could not be found by force, only by intellect. Zeus did not come to her with threats or demands, but with a question born of his long years of contemplation. How does one defeat a king who has consumed his own legacy? Metis, whose eyes held the depth of the ocean and the clarity of a night, saw in this young god not the raw ambition of his father, but a mind that sought balance. She tested him, not with riddles of power, but with paradoxes of justice and mercy. He passed, not by answering, but by understanding. It was she who guided his raw strength, tempering his fire with the cool waters of strategy. Together, they crafted the weapon that would undo the decades of Cronus's tyranny, not a blade, nor a bolt of lightning, but a potion, a simple emetic disguised in nectar. An act of consequence, as slow and inevitable as the turning of the ages, disguised as a humble cup-bearer, his divine radiance veiled beneath a cloak of meekness. Zeus made the perilous journey to Mount Othrys. He walked through gates that loomed like the jaws of a beast, into halls where the very stones seemed to watch him with ancient, weary eyes. He came before the throne of Cronus. The king sat slumped, a figure of immense power, hollowed out by fear. He was weary, his great frame burdened by the weight of his own crown. But his pride remained, a jagged and dangerous thing he never suspected. The youth who bowed low before him, whose face was a mask of placid servitude. Zeus offered the golden chalice, the potion swirling within like liquid starlight. Cronus, his mind lost in memories of a golden age he himself had destroyed, drank deeply as he had in the days when the world was new and his reign was a promise, not a curse. And then the storm began within. A shudder ran through the Titan king. His breath, once the wind that moved the world, turned to flame, scorching the air. A tremor took him, a deep, foundational quake that shook the very mountain. His eyes, wide with a dawning, horrified understanding, fixed on the cupbearer who was no longer bowing but standing tall, his disguise melting away to reveal the searing light of the storm god within. From Cronus's mouth came first a cry of agony and betrayal, then a flood. One by one, the swallowed gods emerged, not as infants, but as fully formed divinities, born anew from their lightless prison into a world they had never seen. First came Hestia, her form serene, wreathed in the grace of a steady, sacred flame. Then Demeter, her hands already reaching for the stone floor, as if to coax life from it, her presence ripe with the scent of soil and growing things. Hera followed, her eyes blazing, already regal, her fury a perfect polished jewel. Then Hades, emerging not with a roar, but in a shroud of shadow and silence, his gaze deep and knowing, as if he had already seen the secrets of the dark places. And last, Poseidon, who burst forth with the roar of a tidal wave, the untamable power of the sea crashing into the stagnant air of the throne room. The siblings, freed and alight with a singular, divine purpose, stood together for the first time. Their eyes met a silent communion of shared trauma and immediate, unbreakable alliance. There was no ceremony, no time for the joy of reunion. The world itself shuddered, as if in response to their rebirth. Cronus, weakened, disgorged, but enraged with the fury of a cornered beast, staggered to his feet. His roar of pain transformed into a call to war, a sound that cracked the sky and sent his Titan brethren rallying to his side. And thus the heavens, darkened with a portent far more terrible than any natural storm. But let us pause here, just at the edge of the coming thunder, and breathe with these newly risen gods. They stand not only as family, a fractured dynasty made whole, but as the very rebirth of a world long starved of balance, of justice, of light. Their rebellion is not yet complete. The first stone has just been cast, but the seed of a new age, an age of Olympus, has been sown in the ashes of the old. Dear listener, the battle that is to come will shake the heavens and scar the earth. In the next chapter, we shall witness the beginning of the Titanomachy, the clash of immortal might, the forging of Olympus, and the first true thunder of a reign that would echo through all the ages to come. Rest now in the quiet between storms. The war draws near. Imagine now the hush before the first strike of thunder, the sky so still it holds its breath, the earth tense with a deep, resonant premonition. The war of the gods, the Titanomachy, was not a single moment of conflict, but an age of violence, a battle that spanned 10 long years, a decade where time itself seemed to bow and warp beneath the sheer weight of immortal fury. The world became a canvas for their rage. The freed Olympians, with the young, fierce Zeus at their helm, established their fortress upon the highest peak they could find, Mount Olympus, its summit perpetually veiled in mist, a defiant spear aimed at the heavens. From this high vantage, they cast their gaze across the lands ruled by the Titans, whose own strongholds were on Mount Othrys, a fortress deep and wide as the bones of the earth itself. The Titans, led by a vengeful Cronus, and bolstered by his brothers and sons Hyperion, the luminous, Iapetus, the piercer, Creos the ram were not swift to yield the dominion they had held since the dawn of time. They had known absolute rule, and they would not relinquish it to these upstart children born of shadow and prophecy. The war began as a stalemate. Titan brawn met Olympian fire. The power of the elder gods was immense, rooted in the raw elemental forces of the cosmos. The younger gods were swift, cunning, and burned with the righteous fire of the wronged. For years, the scales of war tipped, back and forth. Olympus shuddered under siege, its slopes scarred by boulders the size of islands. Mount Othrys was assaulted by gales and divine fire, its ancient stones groaning in protest. Zeus, realizing that raw power alone would not grant victory, knew he needed allies forged in even older fires. Guided by whispers from the Earth Mother, Gaia, who had grown weary of the Titan's tyranny, he resolved to seek aid from a place of ultimate despair. He descended into Tartarus. This was no mere journey into the underworld. It was a plunge into the pit below, even Hades' future realm, a primordial void of darkness and punishment. The air was thick with curses and ancient sorrow. Here, languishing in chains forged by Uranus long ago, were the elder children of Gaia, the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants of thunderous strength and forges hotter than starfire, and their brothers, the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, whose might was that of a walking earthquake, with a word of liberation and a strike of his own nascent power. Zeus shattered their bonds. The Cyclopes, Brontes, Sterops, and Argus, whose names meant thunder, lightning, and Flash looked upon their liberator not with suspicion, but with gratitude as vast as the abyss they had endured. In the fiery heart of Tartarus they set to work at their long-abandoned forges. In return for their freedom, they armed the new generation. To Zeus they gave the ultimate weapon, the thunderbolt, a jagged spear of pure energy crackling with the fury of the storm. To Poseidon they forged the trident, a three-pronged spear that could stir the calmest oceans into raging tempests and shake the foundations of the land. And to Hades they gifted the helm of darkness, the cap of invisibility, a crown of shadow, under which he could pass unseen, a whisper in the heat of battle. To the Hecatoncheires they needed give no weapon, for their very bodies were instruments of war. With these divine tools, and with the Hecatoncheires now fighting beside them, 100 hands hurling mountains as if they were pebbles, the tide of the war turned. The battle was not waged in silence. The world became a theater of tremors and cosmic flame. Mountains cracked and were thrown across continents. Rivers boiled in their beds and turned to steam. Forests of ancient trees wept. Ashen were reduced to plains of glass. The air grew thick and heavy with the cries of beasts, mortals, and gods alike. A symphony of planetary agony. Atlas, the steadfast Titan, son of Iapetus, stood at the forefront of his brethren, a mountain of flesh and will unto himself, holding the line against the Olympian onslaught. Hyperion blazed with a solar wrath that sought to blind the younger gods. Oceanus, the great world-encircling river, roared from the deeps, rising in colossal waves to smash against the shores of the world. And Cronus, though aged and burdened by the poison that had freed his children, fought with the desperate, cornered fury of a king who knows he cannot win, yet dares not lose. For 10 years the war raged, and each side gained and lost. Olympus shuddered and held. Othrys faltered and was rebuilt. The earth itself bore the scars of their conflict craters, where stray bolts of power had fallen. Valleys, newly carved by divine tears, seas stained with the golden ichor of immortal wounds. But Zeus, guided by the cunning of Metis and the thrum of the storm in his blood, saw his moment. In a final, cataclysmic charge, he led his siblings forward. Poseidon struck the earth, and it split open before the Titan lines. Hades, wearing his helm, moved among the enemy like a phantom, sowing discord and terror. And Zeus, ascending to the highest point in the sky, gathered all his power, all his rage, all his hope for a new world, into one definitive strike. With a roar that was the birth of all thunder, he hurled his bolt, cleaving the very heart of Cronus's fortress on Mount Othrys. The old king fell, not with a cry, but with a profound and sudden silence, silence that rolled across the battlefield like a dense fog, extinguishing the fires of war and the sounds of fighting in an instant. The Titans were chained, not slain, for even in his victory, Zeus feared the ancient curse of kinslaying that had haunted his father and grandfather. He cast them down, deep into the echoing abyss of Tartarus, binding them with serpents of unbreaking will, beneath 100 iron gates, now guarded by their erstwhile prisoners. The hecatonch. Atlas, for his prominent role, was condemned to a fate some say was worse, to bear the entire weight of the heavens upon his shoulders for all eternity, a punishment not of sharp pain, but of endless, crushing burden. And so, dear listener, the war ended, the skies cleared, but only in part. A new quiet settled upon the world, the quiet of exhaustion and consequence. For though the battle was won, the world had been irrevocably changed. Olympus rose as a throne, not of promised peace, but of established order. The gods had carved their place in the cosmos, not with wisdom, but with war. In the next tale, we shall see Zeus formally crowned, not as a savior, but as a ruler. A crown glistens not only with the light of power, but with the darkness of the shadow it casts. Until then, rest in the quiet when no lightning strikes. The age of gods has only just begun. The battlefield lay smouldering, its silence as heavy and profound as the end of an eon. Smoke curled like ancient, unreadable script against a twilight sky and a fine grey ash. The residue of divine power drifted where once the mighty had stood and fallen. The Titans were defeated, not erased, for gods rarely die, but condemned to a defeat deeper than any grave, an eternity of imprisonment in the world's belly. Zeus stood at what felt like the edge of the world, his thunderbolt still humming with residual heat, a low thrum against his palm. Around him, his siblings, fierce, marked by ichor-stained wounds, and victorious, gathered to decide the fate of those who had reigned before them. This was not a moment for mercy. It was a formal reckoning, a line drawn between one age and the next, written in the ink of justice and power. Tartarus, the great pit, yawned below the very roots of the earth, a place deeper than despair and more eternal than time. It was to this lightless abyss that the Titans were condemned. One by one, they were dragged from the battlefield by the hecatoncheires, their immense forms bound in humbled Creos and Coeas, Iapetus and Hyperion, and Cronus last of all, his golden eyes still burning with defiant pride, silent and regal even in his ultimate defeat. The chains that bound them were not forged of mortal iron. They were living things, serpents of will and unbreakable justice, spun by the hands of the fates themselves and tightened by Zeus's own unyielding decree. The gates of Tartarus groaned shut with a sound that echoed through the cosmos, a final, grinding note of closure. They were sealed with runes of binding, spells that no whisper, no prayer, no passage of millennia could ever undo. And Atlas, poor, steadfast Atlas, he who had stood unyielding as a pillar of the Titan cause, was not cast into the pit with his brethren. His punishment was designed to be more cruel in its eternal, conscious endurance. For his leadership and his unbending rebellion, He was sentenced to bear the crushing weight of the sky, the celestial sphere of Uranus, upon his broad back. He was marched to the westernmost edge of the world, and with bent knees and a spine that would forever feel the strain of breaking, he took the heavens upon his shoulders, becoming the silent, living scaffold of the world, an eternal pillar between heaven and earth. His agony was a constant reminder of the cost of defiance. There was no wild jubilation upon Olympus, no drunken songs of victory. The adrenaline of war had faded, leaving behind only the slow, dawning realization that the conflict had changed them all. The Olympians were no longer the hidden children from a Cretan cave, or the disembodied spirits in a father's gut. They were rulers, conquerors, and their reign began not with an act of creation, but with the subjugation of their own kin. Yet, the echo of the Titans remained. The earth, Gaia, remembered her vanquished children. The mountains whispered their names in the lonely howl of the wind, and though sealed away in darkness, they endured, their hatred buried like a seam of smouldering coal in the belly of the world. A silent promise that no victory is ever truly final. Zeus, now the unchallenged sovereign, looked to the horizon not with a sense of peace, but with a wary, calculating caution. Power, once taken, must be diligently kept. And the first lesson of his new rule, the lesson he had just taught the cosmos, had been written in chains. Dear listener, we turn now from the grim work of punishment to a moment crowned with laurels and shadow alike. Zeus shall ascend the throne of Olympus, but the storm that brought him to this height still murmurs, a restless presence just behind the clouds. Rest a while longer. The Thunder King has only begun to reign. The acrid smoke of battle had thinned, but the air still held its metallic center, mingling of ozone, immortal ichor, and burned earth. On the pristine, newly formed heights of Olympus, the world waited. The trees on its slopes stood stilled. The rivers in the mortal realm below hesitated in their flow, and even the sun, it seemed, paused on the rim of dawn, holding its breath, to witness what was to come. The gods gathered not only the 6 siblings born of Cronus, but newer spirits too, divinities awakened by the chaos of the war and woven from the very breath of the remade world. They stood in a great, silent circle upon the highest plateau of the mountain, under a sky no longer ruled by the fearful gaze of the Titans. Yet even in this moment of ultimate victory, a solemn hush held them. Power had changed hands, but the question lingered in the air, unspoken. Would it change hearts for the better? It was Hestia, the eldest, the quietest, and the wisest, who first stepped forward. Her presence was a bomb upon the raw nerves of the post-war world, with a flame born from no earthly hearth, a pure fire of spirit and home that she cupped in. Her hands, she anointed Zeus. She touched his brow, his hands, and his heart, not as a sister anointing a brother, but as the soul of the family acknowledging its new sovereign. One by one, the others followed, each in their own manner. Poseidon, sea-eyed and deep as the tide, his pride a powerful current beneath a calm surface, bowed his head in a gesture of profound, if reluctant, respect. Hera, radiant and fiercely proud, her gaze already carrying the weight of a future queen, offered her allegiance with a look that was both a promise and a challenge. Hades, cloaked in his customary shadows but resolute in his stance, gave a single, solemn nod of assent. Demeter, whose hair seemed to bore seeds of a coming spring, pledged her loyalty with a hand placed over the earth, a vow to help nurture the world they had just fought to win. They laid their hands upon him not in the chains of imprisonment that had defined the last age, but in a vow of unity. Zeus, the youngest, once the hidden secret in a cave, now stood at the center of the cosmos, cloaked in the majesty of the storm and crowned not with gold or jewels, but with the crushing, invisible weight of destiny. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not the cracking whip of a tyrant. It rolled low and steady, like distant summer thunder, a sound of immense power held in perfect control. He promised order where chaos had ruled. He promised a world where gods and mortals would each know their place, bound by laws of nature and fate. No more swallowing of children. No more hiding in caves from a paranoid father. A new covenant, yet in the gleaming marble shadows of the nascent Olympian palace, a different murmur stirred. Not all gods bowed so gladly. Not all hearts trusted that a reign begun in such a violent war would, or could, end in peace. But in that moment, as Zeus stood anointed, none dared speak against him. The sky itself seemed to lean closer, to listen, as if ready to strike down any voice of defiance with a bolt of lightning. The age of fear was over, but the age of awe had just begun. And so the reign of Zeus began, not with the gentle blush of a dawn, but as a storm subdued and harnessed. A throne carved from solidified cloud, a scepter shaped from a captured bolt of lightning, and a gaze that now missed nothing. From the turning of the farthest star to the fall of a single leaf in a mortal forest. Dear listener, remember this moment of coronation. For though it gleams with the brilliant light of triumph, the cracks in the foundation of this new order already begin to show. Power is a flame that consumes even as it warms, a force that reshapes the one who wields it. And in the long and storied reign of Zeus, both the light and the shadow will grow to legendary proportions. Close your eyes now. The next tale waits in the silence that follows the crowning the uneasy peace of victory and the first great challenge of kingship. The Skyfather sits enthroned, but storms are not so easily banished from the hearts of gods in the first days of Zeus's reign. The sky above Olympus was a flawless, crystalline blue, but the gods who walked its shining halls knew that such clarity was not the same as calm. The war had been won, the enemy imprisoned, the crown secured. But now came the harder, more delicate task of governing a world they had inherited through violence, and of governing themselves. Zeus, now king in title and in truth, summoned his two powerful brothers, Poseidon and Hades, to a sacred council. They stood together on the highest summit, the very pinnacle of Olympus, with the endless tapestry of stars above them and the scarred, healing earth of the mortal world far below. Each bore the marks of their shared history, the weariness of a decade of war, the lingering fire in their eyes, and a new, heavy gravity in their bearing. And each knew that the unity forged in rebellion was a different thing entirely from the unity required to rule. I did not fight to trade one tyrant for another, Zeus began, his voice measured, echoing slightly in the thin, pure air. I do not seek to rule all things alone. The cosmos is too vast. Let us share the world we have remade, not as rivals, but as stewards of our own domains. Tradition dictated that the realms be divided by lot, so that none could accuse the new king of favoritism, and so that fate itself would have a hand in their destinies. 3 lots were prepared, symbols of the great domains of creation. They were cast, and each brother drew his kingdom to Poseidon, whose raw strength had turned the tides in the great war. Went the second lot. He drew dominion over the sea, the vast, restless, and deep oceans, from the sunlit surface to the lightless trenches, would be his to command. all the waters of the world would answer to him, and with the trident gifted by the Cyclopes now his official scepter, Poseidon accepted his kingdom not with glee, but with a deep and solemn gravity. He knew the sea's profound beauty, but also its mercurial, destructive moods. His own nature was reflected in its depths. To Hades, who had walked unseen among the Titans and felled them from the shadows, went the third lot. He drew the underworld. This was not an exile, but a kingship of a realm equally vital to the cosmic balance. There, among the silent shades of the dead, Hades would build a kingdom of order, finality, and reflection. The helm of darkness still hung at his side, a perfect tool for a ruler who valued quiet and solitude. Though he spoke no words, his nod of acceptance held both the sorrow of his sunless realm and the solemn assent of a god who understood his duty. And Zeus, as the caster of the lots and the leader of their rebellion, by right and by fate retained the first and greatest portion, the sky. He claimed the vast overarching vault of the heavens not merely for himself, but as a throne from which he could watch over all. The clouds, the stars, the shifting winds, the life-giving rain and the destructive storm, these became his watchtower, his whispering gallery, his undisputed realm. Thus, the world was divided into a trinity of power: the heavens, the seas, and the depths below. Earth itself, Gaia's eternal body, and the heights of Olympus were declared common ground, to be shared among them, all the place where gods might walk and interact, and where the lives of mortals would unfold under their collective and often capricious gaze. But even in this fated balance, tension lay coiled like a sea serpent in the deep. Poseidon's pride, as vast as his new kingdom, stirred like storms. Hades, though silent, held his own visions of justice, separate and absolute from those of his sky-dwelling brother. The bonds of brotherhood, once forged in the fires of a common cause, would now be tested by the immense weight of sovereignty. Dear listener, balance is a fragile and precious thing. It trembles under the smallest breath, and when gods breathe, the entire world must hold its ground. Let us now follow this trembling thread of divine family and power into the next tale, where love, deceit, prophecy, and the ever-present threat of betrayal begin to weave a darker, more intricate web. For though the gods have claimed their thrones, their hearts, so like our own, remain wild and untimid. The crown upon Zeus's brow gleamed with the cold hard light of fresh victory, a circlet of celestial gold forged in the fires of a vanquished age. But peace, dear listener, is not a thing that gods wear well. It is a garment too plain, too quiet for beings born of cosmic tumult. No sooner had the last of the Titans been cast into the whispering abyss of Tartarus and the peaks of Olympus claimed, than Zeus, now king, turned his eye to companionship. This was not a search born of loneliness, for a king of gods is never truly alone, surrounded as he is by power and praise. It was a search born of desire, and perhaps the deeper, more primal hunger to bind his new dominion, not just with force, but with legacy. He looked first, not outward across the shimmering seas or the verdant mortal lands, but inward to the one who mirrored his own divine fire, his sister, his equal in majesty and will. He looked to Hera. She was resplendent, a vision of sovereignty. Her beauty was not the fleeting kind found in nymphs or mortals. It was structural, like that of a mountain or a star. She was adorned not by jewels or the flattery of lesser gods, but by her own immense gravity, a quiet authority that made the very air around her feel ancient and sacred. It was the kind of grace that made others bow without understanding why, their knees bending to a power they could feel but not name. Hera, goddess of marriage, protectress of women, and guardian of sacred bonds, had watched the great war with eyes that missed nothing. She saw the brutal strategies, the shifting allegiances, the moments of cowardice and the blinding flashes of glory. She had stood with her brothers, her power a steady shield against the chaos. But now, in the stillness of victory, she stood apart, untouched by the reckless folly of battle, and most certainly untouched by Zeus, who had mastered storm and sky, who could make the firmament tremble with a single thought. Found in her a challenge no thunderbolt could conquer, a fortress no siege could breach. Her stillness was a quiet rebellion against his noise. He approached her with gifts, first not gold or jewels, for he knew she held no esteem for trinkets. He brought her living things, fragrant, star-petaled blossoms plucked from the highest, most treacherous peaks of Olympus, flowers that died the moment they left the pure mountain air, yet lived on in his hands, their scented testament to his power over nature. He offered her ambrosia so potent it tasted not of fruit, but of memory of the first dawn, of the quiet hum of creation. His words were as silken as summer air, weaving promises of a shared throne, of a universe ordered by their twin majesties. He spoke of a cosmos where his thunder and her wisdom would reign in perfect, unassailable harmony. But Hera, whose wisdom was as old as his power, refused him. Her gaze was clear and untroubled. She knew his heart was not yet tempered by true love, but driven by the same fire that had won him the war. Conquest disguised as courtship. He wanted to possess her serenity, to claim it as another peak in his ever-expanding kingdom. Zeus, unaccustomed to denial, did not yield. He was a god of transformation, and so he transformed his methods. He shared his magnificent form, for he knew his own glory was a kind of armor she would not let him past. He became a whisper in the wind, a current of mist that caressed the columns of her temple, hoping to seep into her thoughts. He took the shape of animals, of breathtaking grace, a proud stag with antlers like polished silver, a soaring eagle whose shadow blessed the earth, all to catch her eye, to earn a moment of her admiration. But she saw through the disguises. She saw the god playing a part. One day, as the story goes, a sudden, violent storm, one of Zeus's own making, descended upon the slopes of Mount Cithaeron, where she walked. The sky turned a bruised purple, and rain fell in cold, hard sheets. He came to her then, not as a force of nature, but as its victim. He appeared as a cuckoo, small and drab, its feathers soaked and shivering, its tiny heart beating a frantic rhythm against its fragile ribs. It fell from the sky, a pathetic bundle of misery, and landed near her feet. Hera, who in her heart was the protector of all life's sacred bonds, was moved, not by a god's power, but by a creature's vulnerability. Forgetting her caution, she felt a pang of pure, uncalculated pity. She knelt, her divine robes pooling in the mud, and drew the shivering bird to her breast, sheltering it from the wind and warming it with her own immortal heat. At that very moment, as the bird felt the warmth of her skin, he shed the disguise. The shivering creature expanded into the glorious, thunderous form of the King of Gods, and he clasped her in his divine embrace. Some say she consented then, her pride finally broken by this strange, desperate gambit, her heart surprised by a tenderness she had not expected. Others say she did not, that she was taken by force, her pity twisted into a trap from which there was no escape. The myths murmur both tales, for even the stars, who see all, cannot agree on the true nature of that moment. It remains shrouded, a secret held between two immense and unknowable hearts. But in time, through consent or coercion, Hera became his queen. The great halls of Olympus, still bearing the scars of war, rang with wedding hymns sung by the Horii, the goddesses of the seasons, their voices weaving garlands of sound. The Graces danced, their movements leaving trails of light in the air. The rivers of the world, it is said, flowed sweet with nectar for a day, and the winds carried the scent of 1,000 flowers. Even Gaia, the ancient and slow-to-blessed earth, stirred from her deep slumber, a cautious approval rising from the soil like a warm mist. Their union, however, was not quiet. It could never be. It was a marriage of equals in power, but not in peace. For Hera, once sovereign in her own right, a goddess who answered to no one, became bound to a king whose desire knew no restraint. She sat on a throne beside his, a queen, in title, but she watched as his eye roamed ceaselessly across heaven and earth, a restless hunger that could not be sated. He chased the fleeting shadows of nymphs through ancient forests. He whispered promises to mortal queens in their fire-lit chambers. He cloaked his wants in 1,000 forms and 1,000 fables, and Hera, proud and fierce, bore the shame not in silence, but in a fury that grew colder and harder with each betrayal. She could not strike her husband, not openly, not yet. To challenge the king of gods would be to unravel the very order they had fought to create. But she could wound his pride through his lovers, and through the children they bore. And she did. Each new affair, each half-divine child, was not just an infidelity. It was a public insult, a splinter driven deep into the heart of her domain, the sacred bond of marriage. Her rage was not merely jealousy, dear listener, but a deeper, more profound fury born of cosmic injustice, of a goddess turned wife, turned watcher of her husband's whims. Yet still she remained enthroned beside him, not out of weakness, but out of will. Hera's vengeance was not a wild, chaotic storm like his. It was precise, patient, and chillingly creative. She understood the long game, the slow, meticulous unraveling of pride. And Zeus, though thunderous and blustering, came to fear that calm, quiet calculation more than any blade, more than any open rebellion. Together they ruled, their love a constant, volatile dance of lightning and storm, rich with a passion that could shake the world, yet scarred by a betrayal that poisoned its roots. Theirs was not a tale of romance, but of tension of two immense powers circling one another in an eternal, gravitational orbit, bound by a vow that was both their anchor and their chain. So let us sit quietly now, beneath their tempestuous sky, and prepare to follow the forked paths of Zeus's wandering heart. In the tales ahead, you will meet those whom he touched and transformed, not with kindness, but with the consuming hunger of a god. Rest here, dear listener. The wind is shifting, the stories grow stranger, and love, in the hands of the divine, becomes something wild and perilous. Come closer, dear listener, and prepare your heart, for this path leads us into the tangled, thorny undergrowth of longing, power, and pain. For though Zeus was king and Hera his queen, fidelity was not the crown he wore. His love, or what he called love, strayed like lightning quick, bright, and often devastating. The affairs of Zeus are not tales of gentle courtship, but of seduction, disguise, and the unquiet price of divine desire. Let us begin with Io, a priestess in Hera's own temple, radiant and chaste, her life a tapestry of devotion woven from spirit and ritual. Zeus saw her one sun-drenched afternoon as she walked beside the silvery meander of the river Atris, her hands trailing through the cool, clear water, her lips shaping quiet hymns to the very queen he would betray. A god's heart is not stirred by beauty alone, but by the presence of an unspoiled grace and in Io's serene piety. He saw a light he wished to possess, but Hera watched. From her throne on Olympus, her gaze missed nothing. She always watched. Zeus descended, not as a thunder god, but as a subtle force. He cloaked himself in a thick, swirling mist that clung to the riverbank, a soft grey curtain to hide his intentions. He became a shadow in the reeds, a longing in the summer air. But Hera's suspicion, honed by years of practice, rose like smoke from a distant fire. She felt the shift in the world, the slight warping of reality that always accompanied his deceptions. As her presence drew nearer, Zeus panicked. To save his prize from his wife's immediate wrath, he acted swiftly. He laid his hand upon Io and transformed her. Her slender limbs thickened and bent, her skin grew coarse and white, her voice, once used for hymns, became a mournful, confused lowing. He turned her into a perfect white heifer, sleek and trembling. Her human mind remained, a terrified prisoner locked behind the gentle, pleading, and now bovine eyes. Hera arrived, parting the mist with her will. She saw her husband standing alone, and she saw a beautiful white cow grazing nervously nearby. With a smile as bright and cold as winter frost, she feigned ignorance. She praised the creature's beauty, its flawless hide, its sorrowful eyes. Then, with practiced innocence, she requested the heifer as a gift. What could he do? Trapped by his own pretense, his lie, a cage of his own making, Zeus had no choice. With a heavy heart, he handed her over to guard Io. Hera did not choose a simple beast or man. She called upon Argus Panops, the all-seeing, a primordial giant whose body was covered with 100 eyes. They dotted his skin like a constellation of sleepless stars. Only a few of them ever slept at once, meaning he was never truly asleep, his gaze a constant, unblinking prison. Io wandered the green fields of Nemea under this ceaseless, horrifying watch, a prisoner in her own skin, unable to speak her name or tell her story. She would scratch her name, Io, in the dust with her hoof for her father, the river god, who could only weep in response. Zeus, tormented by guilt, sent the most cunning of his sons, Hermes, the messenger god. He came to Argus not as a warrior, but as a humble shepherd playing a reed pipe. The music he played was no ordinary tune. It was woven with sleep, with stories of old, forgotten things. With the gentle lapping of the river Lethe, he spoke and sang for hours, his voice a droning lullaby, until, one by one, every last one of Argus's 100 vigilant eyes blinked, grew heavy, and closed in a deep, profound slumber. And then swift, silent as a thought, Hermes drew his blade and struck. Io was freed from her guardian, but she was not freed from her queen. Hera, enraged by the death of her sentinel, was unforgiving. She took one of the gadflies that buzzed in the stagnant swamps and enlarged it, infusing it with a maddening, relentless purpose. She sent it to torment the heifer. The insect buzzed at her heels, its sting a needle of fire, driving her into a frantic, endless flight. Across lands and waters she fled, a terrified beast with a human soul, from the fields of Greece, through Illyria, and across the strait that would forever be known as the Bosporus, the Cow's Ford. Her mournful cries echoed through lonely valleys, until the sea that parted to let her pass the sea she swam in her desperation, came to bear her name, the Ionian. Next came Leda, the mortal queen of Sparta, a figure of renowned poise and quiet dignity, wife to King Tyndareus. One evening, as the sun bled out across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and bruised orange, she walked alone by the banks of the Eurotas River. The air was thick with the scent of olive blossoms, and Cyprus, Zeus, ever watchful from his celestial perch, saw her there, a portrait of grace in the fading light. He descended not in his own form, nor as a storm, but as a swan, a creature of impossible beauty, its feathers as soft as spun moonlight, its neck a perfect, elegant curve, its eyes alight with an unnatural, divine wisdom. He orchestrated a disturbance in the sky. The illusion of a predatory eagle in Persitand fell into her lap as if wounded, shivering with artful terror, moved to compassion by the magnificent creature's plight. Leda held it, stroking its long neck, murmuring words of comfort. And there, under the heavy stillness of twilight, in the space between pity and passion, the line was irrevocably crossed. Some bards sing that she yielded willingly, captivated by its divine beauty. Others whisper that she was overcome, her compassion used against her. But from this strange, unsettling communion came to eggs, pearlescent and heavy with fate. From them hatched Helen, whose face held a beauty so profound it would split kingdoms and set the world on fire, and the twins, Castor and Pollux. One mortal, one divine, bound forever in a celestial brotherhood. Then there was Europa, a Phoenician, princess with a spirit as free as the sea breeze. She loved the feel of wind in her hair and the scent of wildflowers underfoot. One glorious morning, as she and her handmaidens played in a sun-dappled meadow by the shore, gathering crocuses and hyacinths into woven baskets, a bull approached. It was unlike any bull they had ever seen, dazzlingly white, as if carved from moonlight, with horns that curved like a crescent moon and eyes that were deep, intelligent, and profoundly kind. It radiated an aura of peace. Enchanted, Europa approached it, adorning its horns with garlands of flowers. The bull knelt before her, and laughing, believing it a divine marvel sent for her amusement. She climbed upon its broad, strong back. The bull ran. In an instant, its gentle demeanor vanished. It charged toward the sea, its hooves barely seeming to touch the ground. Into the waves it leaped, and the waters did not resist. Its hooves parted the waves as if they were fields of grass. Europa clung tightly, her laughter turning to gasps of fear and astonishment, the spray of the sea cold on her face. Across the vast expanse of the Mediterranean they raced, until they reached the shores of Crete. There, and only there, did Zeus reveal himself, not with the fury of a storm, but in a blaze of divine glory. He did not apologize. He gave her sons Minos, who would become the famous king of Crete, Rhadamanthus, who would become a judge of the dead, and Sarpedon, a hero of Lycia. He built for her a new kingdom on the continent that would bear her name. Yet still he left Danae's tale is darker still, a story of fear and imprisonment. Her father, Acrisius, king of Argos, was warned by an oracle that his own grandson would one day destroy him. Terrified, he sought to cheat fate. He sealed his only daughter, Danae, in a bronze chamber built deep beneath the stone floors of his palace. There were no doors, no windows, only a single small opening in the ceiling, a crack that let in a sliver of daylight and air. But even a sliver of heaven is enough for the king of gods. Zeus, seeing her lonely beauty, her unjust confinement, desired her. He could not break down the bronze walls, so he found another way. He came as a shower of gold, a liquid, shimmering cascade of pure light and wealth poured through the crack in the ceiling, pooling on the stone floor like a miniature sun. The golden rain enveloped Dano, not with violence, but with a warm, glimmering weight. From that strange and silent union came Perseus, a boy destined to slay monsters and wrestle with fate itself. When Acrisius discovered the child, his terror doubled. He refused to believe it was the work of a god and, unwilling to directly kill his own blood, cast Dano and the infant Perseus into the sea inside a great wooden chest. But the sea, ever shifting and under the sway of gods, bore them safely to the island of serfs. Others followed, their stories a litany of divine obsession. Semele, who would burn to ash for daring to see Zeus in his true, unbearable form. Callisto, a nymph of Artemis, turned to a bear by Hera's wrath. Antiope, wronged and left to wander in madness. Each story bears the same tragic refrains as descends, transforms, seduces or seizes, and departs, leaving behind children who are half divine, half abandoned, and always Hera watched. Her fury, a cold and constant star, fell almost exclusively upon the women and their children, never the man. Io wandered as a cow. Leto, pregnant with Apollo and Artemis, was barred from every land, cursed to find no place on earth to give birth. Echo, once full of voice and story, was silenced to a mere whisper of others' words. It is a cruel, ancient truth. When power wounds, it is often the powerless who bear the most visible scars. Zeus, for all his might, carried no shame. The world bent for him. The rules were his to make. Temples rose in his name, their altars smoking with sacrifice. But the trail of his desire cut deep grooves through history, roofs of sorrow and mountains of fire. And what of Hera? She endured, not quietly, not gently, but with the cold, enduring flame of a queen who has known betrayal too many times to count. Her anger did not fade with time, it refined, it calcified. She became not softer, but sharper, her heart a diamond of hardened grief and resolve. Dear listener, these stories are not told to judge, but to understand. The gods, in these tales, are mirrors of our highest hopes and our lowest, most ravenous hungers. Their love is not safe. Their touch leaves marks that never fade. Rest now, and let the tales settle like silt in still water. Ahead lies a new shadow on the face of Olympus, not of love, but of fear. For even the mightiest king, surrounded by his power, hears whispers of rebellion in the wind, and Zeus, though crowned and adored, begins to tremble at the edges of fate. Asterisk power, once seized, seldom settles. And for Zeus, dear listener, the throne he claimed from Cronus was no resting place, but a summit exposed to every whisper of wind. The crown that had seemed a triumph now felt like a burden edged with frost. He had seen what power could do. He had wielded it. He had watched it consume his father, twist his gaze, and shroud his joy. Now he sat upon the throne of Olympus and listened to the rustle of leaves, the murmurs of nymphs, the crackle of hearth fire. Every sound, he feared, might carry the breath of prophecy. Themis, goddess of divine law and prophetic insight, came to him not in fury or plea, but in stillness. She did not need to raise her voice. Her words, soft as falling snow, pierce the heart more surely than any storm. "There will come a child," she said, "born of your union with wisdom. That child will surpass you." Zeus trembled, not outwardly, where gods and mortals could see, but deep within, in the part of him that still remembered being hidden in a cave. The boy nurtured in shadow had become the king crowned in lightning, but he had never truly left the fear of loss behind. He asked again and again, but the answer did not change. A child of his would rise higher, cast a longer shadow, he thought. Then of his father, Cronus, and the prophecy that once drove him to devour his own. Zeus had risen because of that fear. Now he stood at the same fork in fate. What path would he take? Not long after, Metis came to him. She was wise, quiet, golden-eyed, a titaness of cunning thought, of wise counsel, of clarity beneath chaos. Zeus loved her, or thought he did, in the way a storm might love the sea it crashes into. But the prophecy clung to his skin, and when Metis quickened with child, Zeus acted. He invited her close, spoke to her with softness. Then, in a moment of trembling dread and divine power, he swallowed her whole. The myths say she did not perish, that within him she still spoke wise and watchful, a second mind behind the thunder. But her body was gone, her presence silenced, all to prevent the birth of the son who might overthrow him. Still, the child would not be denied. In time, Zeus was racked with pain, no wound, no illness, but a splitting ache that thundered through his skull. The gods gathered, unsure, afraid. At last, Hephaestus, the smith, raised his axe and struck his father's head. And from that wound, radiant and fully grown, sprang Athena, goddess of wisdom, war, and the quiet resolve of strategy. Zeus looked upon her, not with pride, but with awe and unease. She was what he feared, and yet she bowed to him. For now, but dear listener, a seed once sown cannot be unsown. The act of swallowing Metis did not end the cycle, it only proved it. Fear begets control. Control begets isolation. And Zeus, king of heaven, began to build his reign not upon love or trust, but upon vigilance. Let us linger here in the stillness of that choice. Ahead lies a cascade of punishments and betrayals. For when a god fears the rise of others, his grip tightens, and what he clutches too hard may yet slip through his fingers. She did not cry. She did not stumble. She stepped forth fully grown, clad in gleaming armor, her eyes alight with the calm fire of insight. The gods gasped not in fear, but in reverence. Here was no ordinary child. Here was a being formed of thought, of planning, of justice sharpened into resolve. She bore no trace of her mother's body, but Metis's wisdom radiated from her. In every motion, Athena was balance warrior and peacemaker, architect and artist, unshaken and unyielding. Zeus looked upon her with a complex gaze. She had not overthrown him. She bowed. She stood at his side. She called him father. And yet, within her presence lay the quiet truth. She needed nothing from him to shine. Athena became the symbol of a different kind of power, measured, principled, strategic. She chose no husband, bore no children, and stood apart from the chaos of tangled loves. In war, she brought order. In council, she brought clarity. She ruled not with dominance, but with the weight of her name and Zeus. He watched, he praised her, he welcomed her, but a shadow lingered. The prophecy had not birthed a destroyer, but it had given form to something he could not control. Dear traveler, this is how fear distorts even miracles. In trying to prevent destiny, Zeus had brought it forth. In swallowing Metis, he planted the seed of something beyond him. And though he smiled at Athena's wisdom, a new paranoia curled around his heart. For wisdom, once born, cannot be silenced, and a king who fears his own kin must rule not with love but with the cold eye of suspicion. Let us tread carefully now, for what follows are punishments, secrets, and betrayals. The thunder is no longer distant. It rumbles beneath the throne. Fear does not vanish once it has served its purpose. It lingers, coils tighter. For Zeus, each act of control had only sharpened the edges of his crown. Wisdom had not freed him from dread. It had only deepened his isolation. He looked upon the gods not as kin, but as pieces on a board. He saw in each one a threat cloaked in loyalty, a future rebellion hidden in the guise of reverence. Even those who had stood beside him in war became objects of suspicion. Prometheus, the firebringer, was the first to suffer under this shadow. Once an ally, a clever titan who had helped Zeus overthrow Cronus, Prometheus became too bold. He championed mortals, creatures Zeus regarded with caution. And worse, he gave them fire, sacred flame, a divine essence stolen from Olympus. With fire came knowledge. With knowledge, defiance. Zeus punished Prometheus with a cruelty born not of rage, but of cold certainty. He chained him to a crag upon the Caucasus, high above all roads, where no comfort could reach. Each day an eagle came to tear at his liver, and each night it regrew, only to be devoured again, an eternal punishment. A reminder to mortals, Zeus showed kindness and wrath in equal measure, but behind every gesture was the echo of his growing doubt. He sent omens and plagues, gifts and punishments. He tested their obedience, their reverence. His temples gleamed, but his gaze was never gentle. Even his fellow Olympians felt the chill. Hera, ever watchful, was kept at distance. Poseidon, proud and deep-hearted, was met with caution. And Hades, the quiet ruler of the underworld, kept to his shadows. Knowing better than to provoke the storm, Zeus built no council of trust. He ruled from the heights, alone in his thunder. Every act of rebellion, no matter how small, seemed to him the beginning of another fall. The memory of Cronus loomed, not as a lesson, but as a warning. Dear listener, when a king sees traitors in every friend, he builds not a kingdom but a prison. And so Olympus, for all its light, began to feel cold. The laughter of the gods grew quieter. The halls of cloud and crystal rang more often with silence than song. In the shadows of this uneasy peace, we turn next to a tale of punishments, a tale where flame and fate meet upon a mountainside. Prometheus still hangs, and the storm within. Zeus has only begun to roar. High in the Caucasus mountains, where the winds slice the skin like glass and the air is thin with silence, a single figure endures. There, Prometheus hangs limbs, splayed against the cliff face, bound in unbreakable chains forged by Hephaestus himself. Each day the sun rises upon his torment. Each night it falls and leaves him with his pain. And every morning, without fail, the eagle comes. Not just any eagle. This is the creature of Zeus's wrath. Its wings shadowing the mountain, its eyes bright with divine fire. It lands with the inevitability of punishment, digs its beak into Prometheus's side, and tears at his liver. The Titan screams not because he fears death, for he is immortal, but because the agony is endless. The liver grows back, the pain resets, and the eagle returns. Why? Why this cruelty, this eternity of torment? Prometheus had once stood with Zeus. In the rebellion against Cronus, he lent his cunning, his vision, his defiance. He saw in Zeus a chance to break an old tyranny, and so he fought. But Prometheus was not a creature of obedience. His loyalty was never blind. When the war was won, Prometheus turned not to Olympus, but to the earth below. He looked upon the mortals, fragile, shivering, hungry, and saw in them the spark of something worthy. While Zeus viewed mankind as clay to be molded and feared, Prometheus saw kinship. He stole fire, yes, not the flicker of hearths, but the sacred flame of Olympus, the fire of knowledge, of invention, of creation. With it, humanity learned to cook, to forge, to build, to dream. They became more than beasts. They became a question Zeus could not abide, that the gift of fire was not just a theft of heat, it was a theft of control. It gave mortals a measure of independence, of choice. And Zeus, whose rule relied upon awe and fear, understood the danger. He struck not at the mortals, not at once, but at their champion. Prometheus was seized, judged, and bound. No trial, no clemency, only the wind, the rock, and the raptor. Some say the punishment was a message, others say it was a warning. But perhaps, dear listener, it was neither. Perhaps it was simply what happens when power fears its reflection. For Prometheus had done more than steal. He had disobeyed. He had said no. And in Zeus's world, no was the one word that echoed loudest. But Prometheus, even in torment, did not beg. He did not renounce his deed. He hung there, whispering wisdom to the wind. Some say he knows a secret, a prophecy darker than the one about Zeus's own downfall, and that it is this knowledge, more than the fire, that keeps him chained. There were those who pitied him. Even among the gods, some hearts stirred. But fear is a thick fog, and no hand dared reach through it. So he remained, and humanity, below, kept the fire. They built, they sang, they questioned. In every forge, every candle, every tale told around flame, Prometheus's defiance burned quietly on. Dear traveler, consider this. The wrath of kings may bind the body, but it cannot always chain the soul. Prometheus waits, and the eagle's wings still beat upon the dawn. The skies above darkened, not with storm, but with judgment. Zeus, seated high upon Olympus, cast his gaze upon the earth and found it wanting. Mortals, he declared, had grown corrupt, irreverent, reckless. The fire Prometheus had gifted them had not only warmed their homes, but fed their pride. They questioned. The gods mocked their myths, and bent the earth to their whims. Where once he might have sent a drought, a plague, a warning, now Zeus chose finality. He would cleanse the world with water, a deluge, so vast that even the mountains would bow beneath its swell. But among mortals, there were two who still walked in reverence: Deucalion, son of Prometheus, wise and just, and Pyrrha, daughter of Epimetheus and Pandora, faithful and kind. When Prometheus heard the mutterings of flood in the wind, he whispered to his son, guiding him to build a chest not of wealth, but of survival. Deucalion and Pyrrha worked in silence, knowing the days were few. As the first drops fell, they stepped into the vessel and sealed it shut. The rains came in torrents. Rivers rose to devour valleys. Cities vanished beneath churning waves. Forests became oceans. The cries of mankind echoed briefly, then were still. For 9 days and 9 nights, the chest floated upon the endless sea. No stars, no sun, only water and the sound of weeping wood. And then a mountain's peak broke the horizon, Mount Parnassus. Their vessel struck ground. When the rains ceased and the sky cleared, Deucalion and Pyrrha stepped onto a world washed clean. Silence greeted the man, earth reborn, but empty. The gods had not only destroyed, they had abandoned. Grief weighed upon them, not for their own survival, but for the loss of all they had known. They prayed not to Zeus, but to Themis, the goddess of justice and divine order. How do we restore what was lost? They asked. Themis, moved by their sincerity, spoke a riddle. Cover your heads and cast behind you the bones of your mother. At first, they wept. How could they desecrate their parents? But then they understood. The mother was Gaia, the earth. Her bones were stones. They gathered pebbles and cast them over their shoulders. As the stones struck the ground, they softened, took shape and rose as new humans. Those thrown by Deucalion became men. Those cast by Pyrrha became women. And so humanity was reborn, not through passion, but through sorrow, wisdom, and a riddle. Zeus, watching from his high seat, felt no regret. He had exercised judgment, not cruelty, he told himself. The world was cleaner now, order restored, but the mortals below remembered. They remembered the flood, the silence, the loneliness. They passed down the tale not as praise, but as warning. Dear listener, water cleanses, yes, but it also erodes. Even divine memory is shaped by the tides of consequence, and the gods, for all their might, cannot stop the stories that ripple outward in the tapestry of divine punishment. Two names echo with a special resonance: Sisyphus, the defier of death, and Tantalus, the betrayer of divine trust. Their stories are etched not in stone, but in motion, the endless repetition of punishment, shaped to mirror their crimes. Sisyphus was a king, cunning and bold. He ruled over Corinth with wit sharper than any sword. But cleverness, unchecked by humility, becomes dangerous. He angered Zeus, not once, but many times, revealing the secrets of the gods to mortals, chaining Thanatos, the god of death, and even tricking Hades into his own shackles. For a time, death itself ceased. Mortals no longer died. The world groaned. Beneath this unnatural weight, Zeus, furious, intervened. Sisyphus was finally dragged to the underworld. But his punishment was not simply confinement, it was futility. He was given a great boulder and told to roll it up a hill. Every time he neared the summit, the stone would slip from his grasp and tumble back down. And so he was condemned, not to torment of body, but of spirit, task without end, hope without fruition. Each day he ascends, each day he fails. Then there is Tantalus, son of Zeus himself, once honored at the divine table. Trusted, beloved, and elevated above all mortals, he dined with the gods, drank ambrosia, and heard their secrets. But pride bred madness. Tantalus sought to test the gods, or worse, to mock them. He invited them to a feast and served them the unthinkable, his own son, Pelops, butchered and boiled. Only Demeter, distracted by her grief, tasted the meal. The others recoiled in horror. The child was restored, remade with divine art. But Tantalus's soul was shattered beyond repair. His punishment was poetic and cruel. He was placed in a pool of clear water, beneath branches heavy with fruit. But whenever he reached for a drink, the water receded. Whenever he stretched for a pear or fig, the branches lifted just out of reach, forever thirsty, forever hungry. Surrounded by plenty, yet starved by his own offense. These punishments were not designed simply to hurt. They were crafted to reflect the deeper sins, hubris, betrayal, and the breaking of sacred trust. And in them, we see Zeus not as ruler, but as judge, jury, and warden. Some say the worst part of these fates is not the pain, but the knowing that no act of penance will suffice. That the gods, once scorned, do not forget, dear listener. Imagine yourself in such a place where the sky is always just out of reach, and the ground forever beneath your task. Would you surrender? Or would you, like Sisyphus, keep pushing, if only to defy despair with effort? In these tales, we glimpse the cold machinery of divine justice and how closely it shadows tyranny, and ahead. The stories grow no gentler. There are few punishments as cruel as giving someone what they ask for, and none more harrowing than being destroyed by the very thing one loves. Semele was a mortal princess of Thebes, beautiful and devout, daughter of Cadmus and Harmonia. When Zeus first saw her, he descended not in disguise, but with soft thunder in his eyes. He wooed her in secret, cloaking himself in shadow, whispering his name only in the intimacy of night. In time, Semele bore his child. Word spread, whispers reached Hera, the queen of Olympus, cloaked not in storm but in silence, came down to earth in the guise of an old woman. She approached Semele as a confidant, gentle and curious. You say you lie with Zeus, but how can you be sure it is he? She asked. Men lie, gods deceive. Demand he show himself as he truly is. Doubt, the most delicate of poisons, bloomed in Semele's heart. The next night, she made her request. If you love me, she said, show me your true form. Zeus hesitated. He pleaded, but he had sworn upon the river Styx, the one oath even he could not break, that he would grant her any wish. And so, bound by divine law, he revealed himself, lightning, flame, the raw essence of godhood, too bright for mortal eyes. And Semele, pregnant with divinity, was incinerated in an instant. Her body vanished in golden ash, leaving only a cry that echoed through Olympus. But from the blaze, something stirred. A child, tiny, radiant, half-formed. Zeus reached into the ashes and took the unborn boy. To save him, he sewed the child into his own thigh. There the boy gestated, nurtured, not by womb but by thunder. When he was born, he was Dionysus, the god of wine, of ecstasy, of revelry and madness, the god who would walk the line between joy and grief, order and chaos. Zeus entrusted him to nymphs, to be raised in secrecy, far from Hera's wrath. And wrath there was, for Hera never forgot and never forgave. Semele was gone, but her son would rise, and in his laughter there would always echo a cry of fire. Dear listener, remember this. The divine burns. To love a god is to touch the edge of eternity and, sometimes, to vanish in its light. Let us now walk deeper into the trials of the mortal and divine. Zeus's judgment is not finished. His tests grow stranger, and his throne grows colder. In the days that followed, Zeus grew restless. Power demands demonstration, and in his unease, the king of the gods turned his gaze once more to the mortal world, not to guide, but to test. He walked among them in many forms, as a beggar cloaked, in rags, as a noble stranger, even as a silent wind. He sought not worship, but reaction. Would mortals offer kindness to the unknown? Would they honor hospitality, virtue, compassion? Too often the answer was no. In one village he came as a traveler, weary from the road. Doors were shut in his face, fires were extinguished. Even the dogs turned on him. And so, in his fury, he summoned fire from the sky. Ash fell like snow. The village was erased from the map of the world. But not all hearts were closed. In a quiet corner of Phrygia, an old couple lived in a humble cottage, Bossis and Philemon. They had little coarse bread, goat's milk, olives from their tree. Yet when the stranger knocked, they opened their door without hesitation. They served him all they had and apologized for its meagerness. The stranger smiled in the morning. The cottage had become a temple. Their village, proud and cruel, was gone, drowned beneath a lake. And Bossis and Philemon, for their kindness, were granted a single wish, to die at the same moment, and become trees that would forever grow side by side. Other stories followed. Zeus struck down liars, punished oath-breakers, scorched kings who defied the old rites of guest friendship. The lesson was clear. Not all mortals would suffer the wrath of gods, but all would be watched. These tests, dear listener, were not acts of justice, but of fear disguised as judgment. Zeus, ever vigilant, sought to measure loyalty, but in doing so, he spread uncertainty. Mortals learned to be wary, not only of crime, but of the very air around them. Faith born of fear is brittle. It cracks under silence. It breaks under time. And so Olympus stood tall, but the earth below trembled. For when gods test men without mercy, even the wind begins to whisper of rebellion. Asterisk, when tyranny grows too tall, dear listener, the earth itself will tremble. From beneath the crust of quiet land, from the hidden bones of Gaia, there stirred a storm, not of wind, but of will. Gaia, ancient and watchful, had long observed the Sky-Father's tightening grip. She had borne Uranus, watched him fall to Cronus, and Cronus, in turn, fall to Zeus. But now, with her children in chains, her grandchildren fearful, and the earth scorched by divine wrath, Gaia grew restless, and so she gave birth once more, not in love, but in vengeance. His name was Typhon. He was not a god, nor Titan, but something older, wilder, a storm-given flesh, taller than mountains, crowned in fire, his limbs coiled with serpents. His voice was a cacophony of 1,000 beasts. His breath birthed hurricanes. Eyes like molten iron, arms that stretched from sea to stars. He rose from the earth and screamed, Zeus. Upon Olympus, heard the cry and knew it for what it was, not rebellion, but reckoning. He gathered his thunderbolts and descended the battle. That followed split the world. Mountains shattered. Rivers reversed their course. The sky darkened for days, lit only by the flashes of thunder and the burning gaze of Typhon. The gods, once proud, fled. Apollo turned his golden chariot and vanished into the western dark. Artemis, swift of foot, fled to the sea. Dionysus wept in confusion. Even mighty Poseidon, lord of the deep, retreated into shadow. Only Zeus stood. The storm and the king collided on Mount Etna. Bolts flew like meteors. Winds howled with words unspoken. For a moment, it seemed the earth might fall back into chaos. Typhon. Struck, Zeus fell. Wounded, stripped of his sinews, Zeus was cast into a cave. The storm god stood triumphant. But Gaia's vengeance had not accounted for cunning. Hermes and Pan crept into the dark and stole back the sinews, wrapping them in song and laughter. They returned them to Zeus, who rose not with grace, but with fury. This time he did not hesitate. He struck Typhon with all the force of the heavens. He hurled the beast into the earth, buried him beneath Mount Etna, where he burns to this day. Shaking the land with his rage, the gods returned. Olympus was reclaimed, but the sky was not the same. Zeus had won, yet the cost was felt by all. For now even gods knew fear, even kings could bleed. And in the quiet that followed, a question lingered. If the earth could birth a Typhon once, could it do so again? Dear traveler, remember no throne is ever safe from the fire beneath it. Even queens grow weary of silence. Hera had long borne. Zeus's transgressions with cold resolve his betrayals, his punishments, his thunderous pride. But after Typhon's uprising, something shifted. For in those dark days when the gods fled, she too had tasted fear, and in that fear, she saw something her husband would not admit, that even kings could fall. And so a new resolve bloomed within her, not rage, but strategy. Hera began to speak in whispers, not commands. She gathered to her the discontented, the cautious, the slighted. Apollo, with his blazing pride and growing distance from Zeus. Poseidon, the lord of oceans, who had never forgotten the shared throne they once considered. Athena, silent but watchful, who understood that justice was not always crowned in thunder. She spoke of balance, not rebellion, of counsel, not war. But her words bore the scent of change. The conspiracy grew in shadows. Plans were made to subdue Zeus, not to kill, for such a crime would unmake the cosmos, but to bind him, to humble him, to remind the storm of its place in the order of things. One night, when the air was thick with summer's weight, they acted. Hera prepared a sleeping draught, steeped in ambrosia and woven with the breath of hypnosis. Zeus drank, as he always did, from her hand. He slept, and while he slumbered, they moved. Chains, forged by Hephaestus and blessed by the fates, were slipped upon the Skyfather's wrists and ankles. His thunderbolt was hidden. His voice, for once, was still. But before the council could act further, Thetis, the sea-nymph, sensed what had passed. She summoned Briareus, the 100-handed one, a forgotten ally of the old war. With his strength, he shattered the bindings. Zeus awoke, not confused, but enraged. He rose with fury that blistered the sky. The plot was exposed. Hera denied nothing. Nor did she plead. For her boldness, Zeus hung her from the heavens by golden chains, anvils tied to her feet. The gods looked up and saw their queen suspended, swaying in divine agony, her silence finally broken by pain when he released her. The silence returned, but it was heavier now. Fear had returned to Olympus, and, with it, obedience. Yet Hera had planted a seed. Not all storms are loud. Some begin as a whisper beneath the throne, and not all rebellions fail. Some simply bide their time. Dear listener, let us walk softly now. The next tale waits in the shadow of rebellion, with hammers and harps, ambition and stone. There came a time, not long after the storm of Typhon and the quiet wrath of Hera, when Olympus began to stir, again not with joy, but with quiet dissent. To gods Apollo, radiant with light and truth, and Poseidon, lord of depths and storm, found themselves bound not in rivalry, but in shared resentment. For though they were mighty, though their names were carved into temples and carried on every wind and wave, Zeus treated them not as brothers, not as sons of Olympus, but as subjects. They had watched as he punished Prometheus, as he drowned the world, as he chained Hera in the sky. They had seen too much of tyranny dressed as law, and so, together, they conspired not to kill, not to overthrow, but to humble. They would refuse Olympus. They would cast aside their thrones, their temples. They would walk among mortals and build a world with their own hands. Perhaps, they thought, the Sky Father would see and soften. Zeus did not soften. He banished them. Apollo and Poseidon were cast to the plain of Troy, where they were made to labor not as gods, but as builders. They worked for King Laomedon, raising the walls of that fated city stone by stone. Their sweat soaked the soil, their hands bled, and when their work was done, when the walls gleamed, and the city rose like a jeweler modern refused to pay, he mocked them. Gods disguised as men, let them starve like beggars. Apollo's eyes darkened, he sent plague, the air thickened with fever. Children cried out in the night. Poseidon shook the earth. The sea rose, and beasts from the deep came snarling to the gates. Zeus watched, but he did not intervene. Let them learn, he thought. Let them remember who rules. And yet the rebellion did not end in failure. It burned on a slow flame. Apollo returned to Delphi. Poseidon claimed his sea, but something in them had changed. They had seen labor, hunger, betrayal. They had suffered as men suffer, and they carried that memory back to the marble halls of Olympus. Dear listener, not all revolts end in triumph, but not all scars fade, and sometimes the quietest rebellions plant the deepest roots. Let us now follow this thread into the final tale of defiance, where the jailer becomes feared, and the mountain grows silent beneath its crown. With each rebellion quelled, Zeus did not loosen his grip, he tightened it. Olympus no longer felt like the palace of a just king. It was a fortress, a place of vigilance. He became not merely ruler, but jailer, and his prison held not only monsters and traitors, but those who dared dream. He turned his eyes once more to Tartarus, that yawning pit beneath the world. He reinforced its gates, doubled the sentinels, summoned Briareus and his 100 hands to stand guard. There he consigned the old enemy Titans, still groaning beneath the weight of time. Typhon still trembling beneath the stone. But he also watched the living. He kept a close eye on Prometheus, whose chains were never loosened. He monitored Hades, whose silence was sometimes too deep. He questioned the loyalty of Poseidon, the patience of Hera, the ambition in Athena's gaze. Even among mortals, Zeus sowed fear. He sent omens at the slightest doubt, withered fields when temples stood empty, and loosed storms to crush the bold. His love, once chaotic, became possessive. His tests, once shrouded in mystery, turned cruel. No longer did gods walk freely among men. Olympus grew distant, aloof. The songs of mortals changed from hymns of joy to prayers for mercy. And beneath the beauty of marble shrines, an unease spread like moss. For a king who fears rebellion sees enemies in every shadow. And when justice becomes suspicion, rule turns to tyranny. Zeus sat upon his throne, thunderbolt ever ready, yet increasingly alone. He ruled all but trusted none, and the winds whispered not, yet loudly, but persistently. Even the gods, it was said, had begun to speak less. Not out of reverence, but because fear had filled the spaces between their words. Dear traveller, we come now to the edge of an age. The reign of Zeus stands tall, but it is hollow at the core, and all that is hollow will one day echo. There is a silence at the summit of Olympus now. It is not the peace of wisdom or the hush of reverent awe. It is the hush of emptiness, the sound of power without warmth. Zeus, once the roaring father of storms, sits beneath a sky that rarely answers. His throne, carved from cloud and fire, stands untarnished. But thrones, dear traveller, are not sustained by lightning alone. They must be rooted in love, respect, and kinship. And these Zeus has spent. He walks the marble halls alone. Once they rang with laughter, debate, and the sweet discord of a divine family. Now the gods whisper in corners. They walk in pairs, in trios, but rarely come to him. Even his own children tread carefully in his presence, their eyes downcast or turned away. He feels it, the coldness, the gap between his hand and theirs, the way his name is spoken more from fear than from faith. His love, Hera, still sits by his side in name, but her silence is no longer submission, it is distance. She tends to her temples and followers, and speaks to him only in ceremony. No longer does she watch the stars with him. No longer does she offer counsel. He misses her, though he may never say it. He misses many things. The forge's roar when Hephaestus worked, the lilting wisdom of Athena's questions, the bright wild laughter of Dionysus in the halls. He misses being a father, not just a ruler. But now, even his children are wary of his gaze. He watches the world below. Once, the offerings flowed like river's fruit, wine, gold, the scent of incense rising with hymns sung at dawn. Now the altars grow cold. Shrines are left untended. Mortals, emboldened by their own philosophies and kingdoms, begin to turn away. They speak of new truths, of ideas beyond the gods. They still call him Jupiter in Rome, still raise statues, but the fire has dimmed. He feels it in his bones, the strange ache of irrelevance, not yet forgotten, but fading. The king of the gods was never meant to fade, and so Zeus walks to the edge of Olympus and looks out upon the mortal world. The wind teases his white beard. The clouds swirl softly at his feet. Once he had shaped empires with a glance. Now they rise and fall without his will. He clenches the thunderbolt, not in fury, but in habit. It feels lighter now, or perhaps he has grown heavier. He speaks aloud, sometimes, hoping the wind will carry his words to someone, anyone, who still listens. But even the wind has grown quiet. Dear listener, we stand now at the twilight of thunder, not with a roar, but with a sigh. And even gods, it seems, are not immune to loneliness. The mighty are not merely feared, they must be loved. And without love, even Olympus grows cold. In the silence of Olympus, there remain voices that do not yield. Athena, daughter of wisdom and war, walks the marble halls with purpose still in her step. She no longer seeks her father's approval, but neither does she flinch beneath his gaze. She carries her own law, her own justice, a justice born, not from thunder, but from clarity. She sits with mortals, councils, kings and queens, and weaves cities of reason and philosophy. She teaches them not to fear the gods, but to understand the world. And in her temples, where owls perch and olive branches grow, the prayers are quiet, deliberate, not cries for rescue, but whispers of guidance. Zeus watches her and does not interfere. Perhaps he cannot. Perhaps he knows that to silence her would be to extinguish the last ember of Olympus's relevance. Then there is Dionysus, the child born of fire and stitched into thunder, the wild god, the wanderer. He dances, not on Olympus, but in the valleys and vineyards of the world. He laughs too loudly, weeps too freely, and teaches mortals to feel everything they have buried. He breaks down the walls that Zeus spent an age building, the walls of order, decorum, fear. In Dionysus's rites, The divine is no longer something above, but something within. His followers wear ivy, not armor. They carry torches, not spears. They speak of ecstasy, not control. And their God walks among them not as judge, but as companion. Zeus looks upon him with unease. There is too much freedom in Dionysus, too much unpredictability, and yet there is also love. The world begins to bend not toward Olympus, but outward, toward new forms of worship, toward gods who do not command from thrones, but emerge from the forest. The hearth, the mind, even Hermes, the messenger, no longer lingers long in the halls of the sky. He speaks to travelers, to thieves, to poets. He walks the crossroads and listens, and Zeus sees what he has become, not the heart of the divine, but a shadow behind it. Dear traveler, remember this. Children grow, and when they do, they walk away not in rebellion, but in becoming. Olympus has not fallen, but it has changed, and in that change, the future begins. The gods were once the axis around which all mortal life spun. Farmers prayed to Demeter before sowing. Warriors lifted their eyes to Ares before battle. Sailors whispered offerings to Poseidon, and lovers called upon Aphrodite by moonlight. But time, slow and soft-footed, wears down even marble. Philosophers began to rise in Athens, in Corinth. In lands touched by reason, they questioned not only the nature of the world, but the nature of the divine. What god needs fear to be obeyed? They asked. What kind of justice begins with lightning and ends with silence? The temples remained, but their doors opened less frequently. The festivals continued, but more for tradition than truth. The statues of Zeus still loomed, but the eyes of the people wandered elsewhere toward the stars, toward scrolls, toward thoughts of their own making. Mortals began to speak of virtue, of ethics, of reason. They found gods not on Olympus, but within the self. They pondered the good life, the just city, the harmony of soul and state. The poets, too, turned. They no longer sang only of glory and conquest, but of sorrow, of irony, of the brittle egos. Of the divine, they painted Zeus not as father, but as fluer, mirror to kings too proud to listen, and thus the thunder dimmed. There were still those who knelt, of course, still those who feared storms, who whispered in the dark. But even their prayers were tinged with doubt, not in the gods' power, but in their care. For what is power without compassion? What is rule without love? Zeus, watching from Olympus, saw this drift. He saw minds open like morning flowers, and none of them turned toward him. He tightened his grip, sent dreams to the oracles, cracked the earth with tremors. But the mortals had grown wise. They read the signs not as divine displeasure, but as nature's rhythm. And in that misreading, perhaps, there was a deeper truth. For the gods had always been stories, as much as they were forces. And stories, once questioned, change. Dear listener, gods are only as strong as the belief that binds them. And when that belief frays, even the heavens begin to tremble. The world below has begun to turn its face toward the future. And the sky. Farther once its axis finds himself watching from the edge. There came a day when even the temples sighed with dust. The garlands no longer hung fresh. The hymns no longer echoed with conviction. Statues, once polished to gleam like morning frost, dulled beneath layers of time and indifference. Zeus, the father of gods and men, stood at the pinnacle of Olympus, watching prayers become fewer offerings, more modest. The great fires that once licked the heavens now flickered low. Even the oracles, once vessels of divine whisper, spoke less of him, and more of the winds, the stars. The heart that whirled below had shifted. Rome, vast and swelling, renamed him Jupiter and enshrined him still, but the reverence was ritual, not revelation. Emperors honored him with marble and gold, yet in their private chambers they trusted more in laws and legions than in thunder and sky. A new age had come, one of scrolls and philosophers, of new gods rising from desert sands, of saviors born not in cloud but in stable, an age that called for gentleness, for grace, for sacrifice. And what place had Zeus in such a tale? He who roared with flame, who punished with stone, who governed with a storm in hand. He did not know how to be silent. He did not know how to be tender. He was a god of rule, not redemption. And so, one by one, the lights of his worship went out. The last grand altar burned low, its ashes caught in a breeze that carried them to unknown corners of the earth. Olympus stood still. The gods did not die, not truly, but they faded. They withdrew into myth, into poetry, into dreams. They became echoes, not commands. Zeus lingered the longest. He walked the halls of cloud and marble, not as ruler now, but as memory. He traced the carvings of old wars, touched the throne where none came to kneel. He stood among silent statues, once offerings, now artifacts. And at last, he looked down not with anger, but with something close to understanding that the world had changed. Perhaps it was time to let the sky grow quiet. Dear traveler, gods do not vanish. They sleep. They become symbols. They wait in the corners of stories, and in that waiting they teach. Let us walk now toward the summits, stillness where Olympus no longer thunders, but listens. And so the wind rose over Olympus gentle, not wild. It wound through the stone colonnades and echoed in the chambers where gods once debated the fates of men. It whispered through the empty banquet halls and stirred the dust. Upon thrones untouched, the mountain stood as it always had immense, serene, wrapped in cloud. But the presence was different now. No longer did it shudder with command or rumble with edict. No longer did the sky split with lightning at a king's decree. Now it listened. Birds circled its heights. Goats climbed its lower ridges. Mortals passed by its base, no longer trembling in awe, but speaking of it in stories, myths their grandparents told, tales their poets shaped dot. And within the highest hall of Olympus, there was still a figure. Zeus sat, but no longer in judgment. His thunderbolt lay at his side, ungrasped. His beard had grown long, his eyes quiet, reflective. He did not rage. He did not speak. He remembered. He remembered the birth of worlds, the clash of titans, the rise of his reign, the fire in Hera's eyes, the silence of Athena, the laughter of Dionysus. He remembered the feel of love, the sting of betrayal, the cost of power, and he remembered how once, long ago, he had been a child. He had hidden in a cave, nurtured by goat's milk and the lullabies of nymphs. He had grown strong, not from dominion, but from hope. Now, in the twilight of his myth, he understood the world turns. Stories evolve. Even gods must make peace with the end of thunder. And as the clouds drifted over Olympus, soft and slow, the last great king of the sky breathed deeply. He let the silence hold him, and in that silence, perhaps there was still divinity. Dear listener, the tale grows quiet, but it is not ended. For stories such as these do not perish. They become the soil from which new ones grow. And somewhere, beneath a quiet sky, a child hears thunder and wonders what it means. And now, dear listener, we return from the clouds. The tale of the Sky Father has been told not as worship, but as witness, not as a hymn, but as a reckoning. What is power without compassion? What becomes of kings who rule by fear, not love? Zeus reigned longer than most empires dream, yet even he, with all his thunder, could not silence time. The mountain that once trembled now sleeps. The heavens that once raged now whisper. But the myth remains. It lingers in marble ruins, in scattered verses, in children's questions. It echoes through every crown worn too tightly, through every leader who confuses might with mercy. It lives not in Olympus, but in us. For the story of Zeus is not merely ancient, it is eternal. It is the shadow beneath thrones, the crack in every empire's foundation, the voice in every storm. And you, dear traveler, what would you do with thunder in your hand? Would you protect? Would you judge? Would you listen? Let this story stir not only the dust of the past, but the seeds of thought within you. The skies are quieter now, but they are not empty. Somewhere, in a story yet to be told, the clouds are gathering again, not in threat, but in wonder, not in wrath, but in possibility. Perhaps they gather above a child who dreams by candlelight, perhaps above a poet with ink-stained hands, or a thinker walking alone beneath a moonlit sky. And when the thunder rolls, may it not bring fear but remembrance. That power alone is never the end of a tale, only the question that begins it. So let us remember the Sky Father, not for the might he wielded, but for the lesson he leaves behind, that to rule is not to command, but to connect, that to endure is not to conquer, but to care, that even the strongest gods must one day become silent mountains. Thank you, dear listener, for walking this path with us through myth and memory, storm and stillness. If you found comfort or thought in these echoes, consider subscribing. We'd love to keep sharing these journeys with you. And now, wherever you are in cities or countryside, beneath stars or street lamps, may peace settle gently around you. Rest well, dream deeply, and until the next tale, good night.